capital itself has gone through a period, circulation, production, circulation. And that as capital struggles for profit in those spaces, political struggle, antagonism will move into those spaces inevitably. So that riot is a form of circulation struggle. That's all, that's sort of the final formula. Strikes are production struggles, riots are circulation struggles. So in periods of circulation, you get circulation struggles, of which the riot is the leading kind. But it's not the only kind. And here I'll make my turn. Because my claim is not that riots have come back. Everyone knows this. It's that we're in a period of circulation struggle, and there'll be various kinds of circulation struggle. So the blockade is a classic example. And we saw some examples of that in the 17th century and the 18th century, in which riots took the form of blockades, stopping the big bread syndics from sending flour or bread out of the parish, out of the county. And so the form of the blockade is part of a logic of riot. And we're starting to see more and more blockades as well all over the globe as a particular form of struggle. I think we might even think of all the movements of the squares, these occupations. Those too are circulation struggles, right? They go into the space of the marketplace, the agora, in that Greek term, which refers both to the town square and to the marketplace. Well, that's exactly where Occupy New York and Occupy Oakland and Syntagma Square and Puerto del Sol in Spain, all across the globe, right? These occupations of the squares are very much this model of a move into the space of circulation to try and interfere with it, as opposed to into the space of production. So that, I think, gives us a framework for the kinds of struggles where, it gives us exactly a model for the kinds of struggles we can expect to see over the next some number of years, the next political horizon, especially in the post-industrial world. And I want to stress that claim, right? In places where production is still doing pretty well, China is a classic example, although it's not doing as well as some think. In places where production is still doing pretty well, we're more likely to see production struggles. In places where production is doing poorly, the capitalist core, or post-capitalist core, we're likely to see circulation struggles. And that's more or less exactly what's been happening. The question is, what will those struggles need to look like to get anywhere? What forms could we expect them to take? And some obvious problems would be like, well, that part where you could get your subsistence goods in the riot, you could go down to the bakery and get your bread. We still see that, right? We still see looting as a very common phenomenon in riots, which people think of as, again, a kind of exception, a moment of indiscipline, something that's gone wrong. But if we think back, it's actually, that's the kernel of the riot in the 17th century. Riots are looting, right? You go to the bakery and you say, we need bread to survive. When we think riots, we should understand looting is their basic logic. And when we see looting in the current period, we should understand it not as an exception, but as the basic logic of riots. But what looting can do in a space of global capital, as opposed to what it could do in a small town in 1704, are quite different facts. And it's maybe on that I should leave off and open up the floor to questions in the time left we have, since that's the basic setting for us. I guess I want to add one thing before I do that, because I haven't integrated part of my framework yet, which is that question of surplus populations that I talked about early on. So I'll note, right, that surplus populations means people who've been formally excluded from the wage. And the appearance of surplus population is the same thing as industrial collapse, right? Because if industrial growth and accumulation only comes from exploiting labor, but industrial development means expelling more and more labor from the process, the expulsion of labor, the production of surplus populations, is the same as the decrease in the possibility of accumulation. So when accumulation stops, that's the same thing as saying we've developed a lot of surplus population. Now, how can surplus population struggle? It's very hard for surplus population to go on to strike, right? Because they don't have access to the wage, they don't have a formal workplace. Surplus population as political actors don't really have the strike weapon at their disposal. So they're going to struggle in other places. Surplus population actually can be involved in movements of the squares. It can be involved in blockades. It can be involved in riots. And so that's another sense. It's the same way, a different way of saying the same logic, right? That a period of circulation and a surplus population where production has declined is going to be a period where the way people are able to intervene is in that space of circulation through those kinds of struggles and not through the strike weapon. Okay. I said a lot. I'm out of breath. And I'm turning over the lectern, the microphone, the chat column to your questions, which I may or may not have answers to, but maybe you'll be able to answer them among yourselves. So I have a question. I really have no idea how to pronounce the name. Abiezer asks, is there a riot prime sequence correlated with the circulation phase at the end of the British Empire cycle? And I agree that's an important question. I actually don't have the data on that. That's research that still is before me to do. The move I'm trying to make is to take the Arrighian framework, but also to modulate a little bit into making a claim that the capital full scale or capital full stop, the history of capitalism in the West, in the capitalist core, can be divided into these three steps: mercantile, industrial, financial, with sub-steps in between. So I sort of want to make a claim for capital to core, but I think that Abiezer is quite right that it's specific to Britain in their financialized phase, which happens. Britain has a huge economic crisis that begins in 1872 or 73. That's their signal crisis, and starts to shift toward finance then to the point where T.S. Eliot, American-born but British citizen, refers to the British Empire as a nation of bookkeepers in 1922, I believe. The question of whether we have an increase in riots then, I think, is a totally reasonable question, and it's going to have to be part of my research program that I head toward. Kathleen Ruiz wants to know, does the sequence keep repeating? I'd have to say which sequence. You mean do we go riot, strike, prime, strike, prime? Well, maybe. To believe that, we'd have to believe that there's going to be a next big cycle of accumulation and a big industrial takeoff somewhere in the globe. I think there's reasons to be skeptical about that. That's a possibility. And for quite a period of time, everyone was talking about, well, China, of course, is the new workshop to the world. They'll be the new global hegemon. They'll restart production. Global profit rates will take off again. People really believe that for a while. It seems less and less likely. Here's some anomalies that Arrighi has pointed out and other people have pointed out. The first thing is, let's not overhype China's productive capacity. It's been adding labor, but it has not been adding labor in the productive sector. The productive sector, industrial production in China, has actually been declining slightly year over year for the last 5 years, while the service sector has been increasing in China. So there's actually not a big increase in industrial production in China. Two, there's a huge anomaly that Arrighi points out, which is that in the past, every outgoing hegemon has been the creditor that's loaned all its finance capital money to the incoming hegemon, right? That was true of the Genoese bankers, funded the rise of the United Provinces. The finance of the United Provinces funded the rise of the British Empire. The British Empire's bankers funded the rise of the US Empire, the building of its industrial capacity. So we would think the US Empire would be, by that same repeating logic, a creditor nation funding the rise of some other new hegemon. But as I'm sure you know, nothing could be farther from the case. The United States is the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. So we seem to have come to an anomaly, if not an inversion, of the entire structure, where it no longer seems clear that this mechanism whereby a vastly wealthy but declining hegemon loans out a vast amount of finance capital to start the production somewhere else. That's just not happening. So it's not clear to me. If I had utterly a lack of shame and an absolute courage, I would make some bold predictions. But I actually just don't know if there's going to be another cycle of global industrial accumulation. I'm skeptical. And in saying I'm skeptical about that, I'm saying I'm very open to the possibility that we're going to get a substantial underlying transformation of global arrangements in the next 50 or 100 years. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be good. The collapse of capitalism as we knew it, I think is actually quite threatening and quite frightening. I wouldn't fight to defend it, but I think there's potentially quite more disturbing directions things could go. But I think that we're up for, depending on our age, we're going to live through some astonishing global volatility, I believe.
We're now unmuted.
A couple of people have said thank you. You're welcome.
Yes, thank you. Hi, it's Daniel. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great.
Hey, great presentation. Thank you so much. I have a couple questions, and the reading that you had us look over was really helpful for understanding how, in a period of what Arrighi calls domination compared to hegemony, what he says is struggles from below enhance the contradictions of the transition, right? And it seems to me that one of the logical next steps, which is what you're doing, is actually to examine in the previous three transitions the role of both on the subjective level of the agents that were the provocateurs and as well as the forms of these riots that enhance the contradictions that under a period of domination where you had a kind of waning late finance transition, it seems to me that your argument is that the riot takes on this sort of super central dominance as a sort of main tactic. However, I wonder, and I know next week we're going to sort of look at this, I wonder what you've seen, because in some sense, I think the transition from British to US almost seems to me as less informative than the Dutch transition. And I think you were alluding to that as well, for perhaps a number of reasons. But I guess the Arrighian framework, it also seems to me that Hart and Negri kind of do have a point, in the sense of how do we use it to gauge events? And I wonder what you would say to that. You sort of addressed it, but how do we use that framework to step outside of this very positivistic, almost total cycle that seems to repeat, even though Arrighi mentions in his postscript that we're currently witnessing things of U.S. domination that are sort of tripping up his formulas, so to speak, right? So perhaps we're in a period of sort of U.S. global domination, and we don't really know where we're headed. And then the Arrighian framework needs to be sort of paused and sort of can we even use it? So I think for the very present moment, my question is sort of, is this Arrighian framework sort of ultra relevant, or is it only relevant insofar as it can tell us yes, the riot is central, but sort of what else can it tell us? And perhaps what else can these previous periods of transition tell us? And I know I packed a lot in there, but I'm sort of just, I'm absorbing it myself. So my apologies.
Yeah, I just think I'm not sure what category of thing you want to be told by this, which is to say, I don't tend to think that history provides us any instructions or roadmaps. So I'm not expecting to be told too much. What I'm interested in understanding is the proper categories to conduct an analysis by, and that's why want to make this sort of make these categories of circulation and production and the kinds of struggles we can understand in them to be primary. And that's when I say I'm interested in description, not prescription. That's part of because I think prescription is very difficult and perhaps foolhardy. So what I really want is to understand the categories. So what Arrighi tells me is not that there's good. So Arrighi tells me specifically that if there's going to be another global hegemon, it's going to be because they can put means of production and labor power together at a ratio very different from the one we have. It'll be a high percentage labor content. So in technical Marxian terms, low technical composition of capital. And so to know sort of where to look for possibilities. But the thing he tells me once I shift his model to the model I'm working with, which is Arrighian, but not Arrighi's, it tells me the kinds of struggles that are going to be possible for people that we're going to see. And, so the thing I'm interested in is moving away from a moralization around riots, where people are like, riots are bad because they're violent, or riots are bad because they're ineffective, or riots are bad because they don't have a ruling idea, which is sort of actually would be bad to use skepticism, is that there's no ruling idea which mobilizes them. So instead of judging riots, to say, listen, all we can have is circulation struggles. Well, no, I think strikes will still happen. I think labor is very important. I think that if there's not struggles in production and that sector is quiescent, there's very little political hope. But I think that we're increasingly bound to see this category of struggle, which I'm calling circulation struggles. I think it asks us to consider the question, which we'll talk about this next week, of reproduction rather than production. And after making sense of that, someone has to. Sorry, I had to tweak my microphone to kill the echo. And that's enough telling. I'm not quite sure what else it is you want to be told.
No, I think I fully understand the distinction between descriptive versus prescriptive, and I don't really have a desire for prescriptive analysis because we couldn't really do much with that outside of sort of magical thinking or mystical thinking. What I was actually wondering was sort of in the stuff I've read on Arrighi and Beverly Silver's work, Chaos and Governance, which is a fabulous text and really sort of like the most up to date, published in 1999, but still reads as if it's like absolutely relevant for today. What I found there was that transitions are like elongated over time when they enter into a period of domination, precisely because under classes in forms of riots, but other social struggles exacerbate the situation for the elites. And elites then have to make a decision about who they partner with in the transition. And so this whole idea of the mantra of the 1% is actually like very compatible with a Arrighian framework, because the question now is on the elites, just as it was on the elites in the British and the Dutch period. Like,
I see.
And therefore I find it like extremely interesting to go back and look at these transitions and see how the relationship between elites and their partnering with the middle class or not partnering with the middle class. I mean, we just saw Syriza was elected in part because the elites refused to partner with the middle class. They fully took a position of utter domination. And, in the United States, we have a situation where elites know very well, I think, to appease the middle class in a certain sense.
Yeah, I got
although some people might debate that.
Okay,
I was thinking more along those lines.
So yeah, let me offer a quick response to that. And I know David has a question pending, and that may run us out of time. But yeah, so this may actually be a place where I break a little bit from Beverly Silver. So Beverly Silver was Giovanni Arrighi's co-author. They're also married. She has survived him, and she's a friend of mine who's actually this project started because she invited me knowing me only as a literary scholar, she invited me nonetheless to take part in this Social Sciences Historical Association project with her, and I'm deeply grateful to Beverly Silver. Now I'm going to just disagree, totally disagree with her. She has an account which is very much of a pendulum account, drawing pretty heavily on Karl Polanyi, in which the capital generates as much profit as it can from labor. Labor gets increasingly unhappy. Labor fights back when it's being exploited to a certain degree. Capital has to give in. It purchases the social peace with a certain amount of the social wages. That decreases its profit margin more and more. It enters into crisis. It has to go back to intense exploitation, which is that mode of domination. The workers are compelled to accept this for a while. Then it gets too onerous. They fight back. And it's just an oscillation between different management styles of capital, and two in particular, one of like maximizing exploitation and immiseration until that reaches a breaking point, and then two, allowing for more, a space of greater sort of social peace until capital can no longer afford that, and then swinging back. I don't think that's right. Its assumption is that the limit on capital's capacity to generate profits is the so-called profit squeeze theory, which is that labor is taking too high a percentage in wages of the profits that are being generated, and that's the main drag on capital that it has to fight against or periodically give into for social reasons. And I just think that's a mistake. I think that the Marxian account, in which the thing that drags down capital's capacity to profit is this expulsion of labor and the production of surplus population, is a more accurate account. So for Beverly, she would still locate the arena of struggle with this industrial proletariat, right, that's fighting for more and more labor share or wage share or whatever. Whereas me, I would claim, and I realize this causes orthodox Marxists no end of annoyance, I would claim that surplus population, the lumpen proletariat, as Marx said, increasingly becomes the revolutionary subject, people who are excluded from capital, not people who are increasingly exploited by capital. Now, I realize that only answers part of your question. That framework of elite alliances, that's largely drawn from the work of two French economists, Dumesnil and Levy, who have actually a very nice sort of chart of development of capital in which they claim there's essentially three positions. The position of the capitalist, the managerial class, so they don't say middle class, but they say the managerial class, and then the laboring classes. And there's shifting alliances. So you have periods where capitalists successfully ally with the managerial class, periods where the managerial class throws in with the laboring classes, and you tend to get restructurings after major crises. And again, this is a model that I'm not sure I entirely believe in. It actually proposes a degree of sort of free agency, on the part of capital that I think is probably somewhat less true. Oh, please don't put up links about me on the sidebar, Sigrid. And I think capital tends to be compelled to do things more than it sits around scheming who it's gonna ally with. But yeah, the question of pressure from below and its role, I think, is a significant one. For me, what I'm interested in negotiating is not so much whether there's pressure from below and who the alliances are, but the question of what the below looks like, right? Whether if the below really clearly was the industrial proletariat in 1930, which I think is inarguable across the Western world. I don't think it is anymore. And so I'm really interested in that question more than the question of sectoral alliances, which strikes me as a somewhat limited and limiting political question. The term in which I think domination is relevant goes back to that carrot-stick model I set forth earlier, which is to say, Arrighi's domination is also coercion, right? There's a period of hegemony at a global level where nations go along with the hegemon because it's worth it to them. And when that stops happening, they have to proceed, not just locally, not just at the question of, Occupy Wall Street, right, and sending in the riot cops, but globally. They have to proceed via coercion. And so we see, for example, the inability of the US to get other nations to go on the endless cycle of adventures in the Middle East and Afghanistan and so on. And like each time we start a new war, fewer and like the coalition of the willing turns out to be like 6 dudes from New Zealand, and that's exactly that model in which hegemony has collapsed. No one wants to go along with us, and all we can do is like threaten people with force. And that exists at a local level too. One of the things that was shocking to me about university struggles in the US in 2009, where tuition got raised very swiftly in a lot of places, and students started to fight back, making fairly mild demands, right? Like, please don't raise tuition 32% this year. That's too fast. We can't handle it. And they would have some kind of protest, and immediately there'd be riot cops, helicopters, canine squads, and it's extraordinary overreaction. I think that overreaction is exactly the same as indicating that we're in a period of domination, of coercion, right? Where there's no way to buy people's complicity. They can't afford it, right? This fantasy that the money's out there and we just need to fight hard enough and whatever sort of services we want will be funded again, it's rubbish. The money's just not out there. There's no social surplus being generated. So as a result, every struggle, even a quite minor struggle, is going to be met with massive military force. Which is why I think it's at this point in history foolish to make minor demands. You're going to be facing guys with guns no matter what demand you make. So I think people should be making quite big demands, given that it's not like small demands or just people are going to grant them. The response is going to be total because it can't be granted. So that tells us a lot actually about what kinds of struggle might be advised, what's going to be necessary, what the limits are. All right, I think I've successfully run out the clock. It's 12 o'clock. What do we want to do?
Can we go over?
You are now unmuted.
If it's okay, I think David has sort of a final question.
Let's
okay?
Let's do it. Absolutely. Okay. If I can't have an answer, I'll defer it till next week.
All right. Actually, there were a couple of points that came up in the interim that I just wanted to quickly rattle off. One was you were responding to someone and made the point that what might that we're entering a period right now that's going to be remarkably tumultuous and may threaten the future existence of capitalism. And you just implied some of the ways that you might address that. I was wondering if you might devote maybe 10 minutes to that in the talk next weekend. I don't know if you plan doing that or not, but it just seemed very intriguing what you had in mind.
I think that's almost all we'll address in the talk next week. That may be the fundamental topic: is what forms of struggle we might expect, and what an anti-capitalist struggle and what a breaking apart of capital might look like and might need to look like. That for me is the only topic for next week.
Okay, so it could be that my question is, again, anticipating next week as opposed to something that you can really adequately address right now. But it occurred to me that your model is very intriguing: circulation, production, circulation, riot, strike, riot. I was wondering if you've done thinking, and perhaps I'm way behind you here, with regard to extending that even further into the realm of discourse engaging revolt and revolution. In other words, do you think that they also correspond, that there's a relationship between these different phenomena? And might you also try to apply a model to a broader conflagration of struggle, something beyond riot, along the lines of a full-scale revolt or revolution? Have you thought about it in this light at all, and about trying to look at the interactions or the relations of these different forms to each other?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think like all, am I hearing like a strange barking noise? What is that going on?
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's my dog. I'll mute myself.
Thanks. I think I probably know how to mute you from here, but that feels weird and autocratic. Yeah, I'm a serious person, as are we all, which is to say I think about revolution all day long. What else do you think about if you're a serious person? I don't think there's enough revolutions in history to treat them as a data set, to be honest. I think that people who want to treat revolution, legitimate revolution as something periodizable, I think there's real problems that arise there. But at the same time, I don't want to isolate them as utterly undetermined or underdetermined events in the Badiouvian sense, just like they arise in an unforeseeable way. And I do have actually quite a bit to say about this. Again, I want to defer that till next week. Not so much about whether you can periodize revolution, but about what revolutionary horizons are. So there's a certain model of what a revolution on, or maybe 1874 on, with the forming of the SPK. There's a certain model of what revolution is as proletarian seizure of the means of production, the seizure of the state and the hypothetical withering away and so on, that I do think is periodizable according to this scheme. I think there's a reason that what revolution is gets defined that way in that period. And I think it's going to be necessary to redefine what revolution is, what it looks like and what its horizons are once you leave a period where production dominates. As I suggested before, that model of the strike as a kind of discipline that's related to the movement, mass class party, and a kind of party politics and a kind of party revolutionary struggle with a revolutionary party that seizes the state. I think that's historically specific to the period of the strike and the period of production. So revolution as such, I think, requires a different understanding of what it looks like and what it means and what its horizon is in a period in which production doesn't dominate in the same way. And that's all I'll say for now. I think I want to leave the rest for next week, if that's okay.